There is a morning we need to get to, a charcoal fire burning on a cold beach just after dawn, the smell of fish, 7 men in a boat, soaking wet, empty-handed after a night of nothing, and a figure standing on the shore in the mist, a man they don't recognize yet, a man who, instead of announcing himself with thunder or light or the vocabulary of heaven, does something that will stop you cold when you finally notice it. He cooks them breakfast. We will get to that morning, but not yet, because before you can understand what that beach means, you need to understand something about this man that most people have spent their entire lives reading past. Jesus of Nazareth did two things that nobody expected God to do. He sat down at tables and he wept. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, deliberately, at the most inconvenient moments in front of the wrong crowds, with the wrong people, he pulled up a chair and he ate. And at the moments when the world expected composure from the Son of God, he cried. Not a dignified tear traced down one cheek. The Greek word is kleio. It means to wail, to cry so hard the sound escapes before you can stop it. Here is what nobody tells you about those two things. They belong together. A table is the one place where you cannot fully perform. You are sitting down. You are vulnerable. You are letting someone feed you or feeding someone else. In the first century, to recline at a table with someone, the Greek word is anakemai, was not a casual act. It was a statement. It meant, I trust you. It meant, I am not your enemy. It meant something so loaded with social and covenantal weight that the religious establishment of Jesus' day tracked who he ate with the way a modern tabloid tracks celebrity sightings. And tears are the same. You cannot fake real tears in the right direction. They go where the grief goes. They tell the truth about what you love and what you have lost and how much it cost you. So when you follow Jesus through the Gospels and you start mapping every table and every moment of weeping, you find something, a pattern, a language, a God who chose over and over again to reveal himself not in the architecture of temples or the grammar of theology, but in the most human things imaginable. Bread broken, wine poured, eyes wet with tears. Let's start at the beginning. The town is Cana, a small village in Galilee, the kind of place that doesn't appear on Roman maps worth keeping. There is a wedding, which in the first century means 3 days of feasting, dancing, drinking, and obligation. Running out of wine at a first century Jewish wedding was not a social embarrassment. It was closer to a public humiliation that the family would carry for a generation. Mary, the mother of Jesus, notices first. She goes to her son, and what she says to him is one of the most understated sentences in the entire New Testament. They have no wine. That's all. 4 words. No request, no demand. Just the fact, laid quietly in front of him, the way a mother lays a broken thing in front of the one person she believes can fix it. Jesus' answer has puzzled scholars for 2,000 years. Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. It sounds like a refusal. It reads like a boundary. But Mary turns to the servants and says, without blinking, do whatever he tells you. She knows something. There are 6 stone jars standing nearby, Jewish purification jars, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus tells the servants to fill them with water. They fill them to the brim. He tells them to draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. And somewhere between the jar and the cup, with no fanfare, no incantation, no visible moment of miracle, the water becomes wine. The master of the feast tastes it and calls the bridegroom over. He is baffled. Every host, he says, serves the good wine first. When the guests have drunk freely, then you bring out the wine that is merely adequate. But you have kept the best wine until now. Stay with me, because that detail matters more than it appears. The best, saved for last, at a table, when people were running out. This is how it begins, not with a sermon, not with a theological treatise, with wine at a wedding among ordinary people who are about to be embarrassed, and a quiet miracle that most of the guests never even knew had happened. John calls it the first of his signs, the first public moment when the glory of Jesus was revealed, according to the apostle who was there. And where did it happen? At a table. But here is what I need you to hold alongside Cana, because most people who read the Gospel of John move straight from chapter 2 to chapter 3 and miss something extraordinary. There is a verse in the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 7, that most churches have never preached a full sermon on. It sits in the middle of a theological argument about the priesthood of Jesus, and it says this: in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. Loud cries and tears. The Greek word for loud cries is kraugi. It is the word used for the sound a crowd makes. It is the word used for screaming. And it is attached here to the prayer life of Jesus, not to one moment, not to one bad night. In the days of his flesh, plural, ongoing, a pattern. This is not the composed stained glass Jesus of Renaissance painting. This is a man who prayed the way David wrote the Psalms, with everything coming out, nothing held back. The full weight of human anguish laid before the Father without editing. When did this happen? The scholars argue. Gethsemane is the obvious answer, and we will get there. But Hebrews says days, plural, which means this was not a single night. This was a man who, across the arc of his ministry, wept in prayer, who brought his grief to God the way you bring a wound to the only doctor you trust. And here's the question that should stop you cold. If Jesus, the Son of God, the one through whom all things were made, if he needed to cry out like that, with loud cries and tears to the Father who loved him, what does that tell you about what he was carrying? What does it tell you about what he understood that we don't? We will come back to that. But first, there is a dinner party we need to attend, and the guest list is going to surprise you. The man's name is Matthew. He sits at a tax collector's booth on the road outside Capernaum. And if you want to understand what that means, you need to understand what a tax collector was in first century Judea. He is not the man you grumble about on April 15th. He is something closer to a collaborator, a traitor, a Jewish man who has purchased the right from the Roman government to collect taxes from his own people, and who is permitted by law to collect more than the official rate and keep the difference. Matthew is despised, not mildly disliked, despised. The rabbinical literature of his era placed tax collectors in the same moral category as robbers and murderers. You could not accept testimony from a tax collector in a Jewish court of law. You could not receive change from a tax collector's coin box without becoming ceremonially unclean. He is, by every social and religious metric of his world, untouchable. Jesus walks past his booth, looks at him, and says two words: follow me. And Matthew, without a recorded word of argument, without a question, without asking where they are going, gets up and follows. But here is what Matthew does next. And this is the part that changes everything. He throws a party, a large one, at his own house, and he invites every friend he has, which means he invites the only people who would eat with him. Other tax collectors, people the religious establishment had written off, people whose names did not appear on any synagogue attendance roll. And Jesus goes. He does not go reluctantly. He does not go to make a point about radical inclusion for the benefit of a watching crowd. He goes because Matthew invited him, and the food is there, and the people are there. And this, apparently, is exactly where Jesus wants to be. The Pharisees see this from the doorway, and they are scandalized. They pull aside the disciples and ask, with the particular edge of people who consider themselves the guardians of something precious, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus hears them, and his answer is so clean and so sharp that it has been cutting ever since. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. He is not being diplomatic. He is not softening the edges of a difficult truth. He is saying something about why he came, and he is saying it at a table with wine in his hand, surrounded by people the religious world had declared unreachable. Now watch what happens next. A Pharisee named Simon invites Jesus to dinner. This is a different kind of table. No tax collectors here, no social outcasts. This is a respectable house, a formal meal. A Pharisee who is curious enough about this rabbi from Galilee to extend an invitation, but not curious enough apparently to extend full hospitality. Because in the first century, when a guest arrived at your home, you did three things. You gave them a kiss of greeting. You provided water for their feet because the roads were dusty and sandals were all most people wore. And you anointed their head with oil, a gesture of honor and welcome. Simon does none of these things. Jesus notices. He says nothing yet. He reclines at the table, and then the room changes. A woman comes in. The text of Luke chapter 7 calls her simply a woman of the city who was a sinner, which is the first century's way of saying everyone in the room knows exactly who she is and exactly what she has done. She has no business being at this dinner. She has not been invited. She has walked into a Pharisee's house uninvited, and she has walked straight past the other guests, and she has come to stand behind Jesus, and she begins to weep. Not politely, not quietly. She weeps the way grief weeps when it has been held back too long, and finally finds the place where it is safe to fall. Her tears fall on the feet of Jesus, and she does not have a cloth, so she lets down her hair in public, which in that culture is its own act of breathtaking vulnerability. And she wipes his feet with her hair and kisses them and breaks open an alabaster jar of perfume and anoints them. Simon watches all of this, and his interior monologue, which Luke gives us access to, is cold and precise. If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. He has reduced her to a category. Jesus turns to Simon, and he tells him a story about two men who owed debts, one large, one small, and a moneylender who canceled both. Which of them will love him more? Simon answers correctly that the one who was forgiven more will love more. And Jesus says, and you can feel the quiet devastation in this. You have judged correctly. Then he turns to the woman, still talking to Simon. Do you see this woman? It is one of the most pointed questions in the Gospels, because Simon has been looking at her the entire time, and he has not seen her at all. He has seen a category, a record, a reason to question the discernment of the man reclining across from him. Jesus sees a woman. He tells her that her sins are forgiven. The other guests at the table begin asking each other who this man is, that he even forgives sins. And the woman, who came in weeping, leaves in peace. Here's what most people miss about this scene. Simon set the table. Simon issued the invitation. Simon created the physical space where this moment happened. And yet, the two people who truly met each other that evening were the woman who crashed the dinner and the rabbi who let her weep on his feet. The table Simon built became something he never intended, a place of absolution. And there is a pattern forming here if you are paying attention. Every table Jesus sits at becomes something more than a meal. Cana, the table of abundance, where the best is saved for last. Matthew's house, the table of the unreachable, where the doctor goes to find the sick. Simon's dinner, the table of judgment that becomes a table of forgiveness. The tables are not random. They are a language. And Jesus is saying the same thing at every one of them. Come, sit down. You are not too far gone. There is room. But the weeping is saying something different, something harder, something we are not ready for yet. Because the next time Jesus weeps, he is standing outside a tomb, and the man inside has been dead for 4 days. And the people around him are asking the question that has echoed across 2,000 years of human grief. Could not he, who opened the eyes of the blind man, have kept this man from dying? The village of Bethany sits on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, about 2 miles from Jerusalem. It is a small place, quiet, the kind of village where everybody knows which house belongs to whom, and which family has been struggling, and which door is always open to strangers. One of those doors belongs to a man named Lazarus. Jesus loves this family in a way the Gospels make specific and personal, not the general love of a teacher for his students. John chapter 11 uses the Greek word phileo, the love of deep friendship, of chosen companionship, of people who have sat at the same table enough times that silence between them is comfortable. Mary and Martha and Lazarus are not followers in the crowd. They are friends. So when Lazarus gets sick, seriously sick, the kind of sick that moves fast and ends badly, the sisters send word to Jesus immediately. Their message is just 5 words. Lord, the one you love is sick. They do not ask him to come. They do not issue a demand. They simply tell him the fact, the way Mary told him about the wine at Cana, trusting that love will know what to do with the information. And Jesus stays where he is. For 2 more days, he stays. By the time he begins the journey to Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. In first century Jewish understanding, this was significant. There was a belief, recorded in the Talmud, that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days after death. But after the 3rd day, decomposition was visible, and the soul departed. 4 days meant there was no ambiguity. Lazarus was not sleeping. He was not in a coma. He was dead in every sense that mattered to the people standing at that tomb. Martha comes out to meet Jesus on the road, and what she says to him is one of the most honest sentences ever spoken to God by a grieving person. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. There is no softening in it, no theological cushioning. She is not performing faith for an audience. She is telling him exactly what she thinks, which is that he was late, and that his being late had a cost, and that the cost was her brother. And then in the same breath, she says, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God God will give you. She holds both things at once, the grief and the trust, the wound and the hope. This is not contradiction. This is what real faith looks like when it has been tested past the point of easy answers. Jesus tells her that her brother will rise again. Martha answers with the correct theology. I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus says something that reorients the entire conversation. I am the resurrection and the life. Not I will cause the resurrection. Not I have power over resurrection. I am it. The thing you are waiting for is not an event in the future. He is standing on a road outside Bethany in sandals, and he is telling a grieving woman that what she has been hoping for has a face and a name. Then Mary arrives. She falls at his feet, the same posture as the woman at Simon's dinner, the same collapse of a person who has run out of the strength required to stand upright in their grief. She says the same words as her sister. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And here's the part nobody tells you. Jesus does not immediately pray. He does not straighten up and speak words of comfort and move efficiently toward the tomb to solve the problem. The text says he saw her weeping. He saw the people who had come with her weeping. And it says he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. The Greek word is embrimaomai. It means something closer to a groan that comes from the chest, an inward shudder, a visceral disturbance. Some scholars translate it as indignation, not at Mary, not at the mourners, but at death itself, at the wrongness of it, at what grief cost the people he loves. He asks where they have laid him. They say, Lord, come and see. And Jesus weeps. The Greek word here is dakrio, and it is different from kleo, the loud wailing he will do over Jerusalem. Dakrio means silent tears, the tears that fall when sound is not sufficient. When the grief is too large for noise and too real for composure, and the only thing left is the wet fact of tears on a face. The people standing there watch the Son of God cry over a grave and say to each other, see how he loved him? And then one of them says the thing that grief always eventually says when it stands next to faith and cannot reconcile them. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? It is not a theological question. It is a wound wearing the shape of a question. Jesus groans again and walks to the tomb. He tells them to take away the stone. Martha, ever practical even in grief, points out that after 4 days the smell will be significant. Jesus looks at her and says, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? They take away the stone. He does not whisper. He does not perform. He lifts his eyes, not down into the tomb, but up to the Father. And he prays one sentence of thanks. And then he calls into the darkness with a voice that will, in a moment, become the most astonishing sound any of those people have ever heard in their lives. Lazarus, come out. And the dead man walks out of the tomb, still wrapped in his burial cloths, blinking in the light. Augustine, writing in the 4th century about the death of his own closest friend, described grief as a soul split in two. He had not yet become a Christian when his friend died, and the grief nearly destroyed him. When he later read John 11, he understood something about the tears of Jesus that he had learned the hard way. Grief is not weakness. Grief is the accurate emotional response to love encountering loss. Jesus did not weep because he had forgotten he was about to raise Lazarus. He wept because he had not forgotten what 4 days of death had cost his family, because the grief was real even when the resurrection was coming. The tears came before the miracle, not instead of it, before it. 2 miles away in Jerusalem, a city is getting ready to welcome a king. The road from Bethany to Jerusalem descends the Mount of Olives, and on this particular morning, it is packed with people. They have heard about Lazarus. Word has spread the way word always spreads when something impossible has happened. Fast, distorted at the edges, but fundamentally true at the center. This man raised the dead, and now he is coming to the city. They cut palm branches. They spread their cloaks on the road. They shout, Hosanna, which comes from the Hebrew Hoshana, meaning save us now. They are not being poetic. They mean it literally. Save us from Rome, from occupation, from 400 years of silence from God. They want a king who will fix the thing that is broken, and they have decided in this moment that they have found him. Jesus rides into the city on a donkey, and when he sees Jerusalem, the whole city spread before him, the temple gleaming in the morning light, the crowds lining the road. He weeps, Cleo, loud, uncontrolled weeping, the same word used for the mourners at Lazarus' tomb. The crowd is cheering, and the king is crying, and nobody around him quite knows what to do with that. He says through tears, if you, even you, had known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. He is not weeping because the crowd is wrong to celebrate. He is weeping because he knows what they do not, that within a week, the same crowd will have turned, that within 40 years, the city he is weeping over will be surrounded by Roman armies and reduced to rubble, the temple dismantled stone by stone, exactly as he is about to predict. He can see the end of the story from the beginning of the parade, and the end of the story breaks his heart. This is the third weeping. And here is what the three have in common. At Lazarus' tomb, he wept for one man, for one family, for the specific, named grief of people he loved personally. Over Jerusalem, he wept for a city, for thousands of people who did not know his name and would not have recognized his face. In Hebrews 5:7, the verse most people skip, he wept in the dark, in prayer, for reasons the text does not fully explain. Just loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. The tears move outward, from the personal to the communal to the cosmic, from one tomb to one city to the darkness of Gethsemane. And every tear is saying the same thing. This is not how it was supposed to be. Before we get to the upper room, there is a hillside we need to visit, because there is a meal that happens in the middle of nowhere, with no table and no chairs and no host and no invitation, that contains inside it the entire grammar of everything Jesus is about to do in Jerusalem. Most people read it as a miracle story about multiplication. It is that. But it is also something else. The setting is a remote place on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The crowd has followed Jesus on foot from the surrounding towns. And when John tells us there were 5,000 men, he is using the Greek word andres, which means adult males only. Scholars who have studied first century Palestinian crowd demographics estimate the total number of people present, including women and children, at somewhere between 15 and 20,000. 15 to 20,000 people on a hillside, late afternoon, no food vendors, no infrastructure, no plan. The disciples come to Jesus with what sounds like a reasonable suggestion. Send them away. Let them go to the villages and buy themselves something to eat. It is practical. It is logical. It is exactly the kind of advice you would give if you had forgotten for a moment who you were standing next to. Jesus looks at them and says, you give them something to eat. They do the math. Philip points out that 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each person to have even a small piece. Andrew produces a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And then, apparently embarrassed by the inadequacy of it, adds, but what are these for so many? What Jesus does next is the moment I need you to watch carefully. He tells the crowd to sit down. On the green grass, John specifies the grass is green, which places this in early spring close to Passover. He takes the 5 loaves. He looks up to heaven. He gives thanks. He breaks the bread, and he gives it to the disciples to distribute. Those 4 gestures, took, blessed, broke, gave, will appear again in an upper room on the night he is betrayed, over different bread, with a different weight. John tells us that everyone ate until they were satisfied, not until they had enough. Until they were satisfied, the Greek word is chortazo, used elsewhere for the filling of animals at a trough, a word that implies abundance so complete it tips into excess. And when the disciples gathered the leftovers, they filled 12 baskets, 1 for each tribe of Israel, 1 for each disciple who had just watched a boy's lunch feed a city. Josephus, writing in his Antiquities, describes the Passover crowds that gathered in Jerusalem as numbering in the hundreds of thousands, pilgrims from across the known world, pressing into a city that could not quite contain them. He is trying to convey scale, but what he is actually conveying, without knowing it, is the hunger, the deep, generational, theological hunger of a people who had been waiting 400 years for God to show up the way he showed up for Moses, with bread from heaven, with water from rock, with presence in the wilderness. And here, on a green hillside near the Passover season, a man from Galilee feeds 20,000 people with a boy's lunch. The crowd understands the signal immediately. John tells us they were about to come and make him king by force. This is the Moses moment. This is the manna moment. This is the one. And Jesus withdraws, alone, up the mountain, away from the crowd that wants to crown him, because he knows something they do not. The bread they need is not the bread they are thinking of. The upper room is borrowed. Someone in Jerusalem has led the disciples to a furnished room on the 2nd floor of a house. The Passover meal is prepared. The lamb has been slaughtered at the temple. The bitter herbs are on the table. The 4 cups of wine that structure the Seder, outlined in detail in the Mishnah Tractate Pesachim, are ready to be poured. Jesus reclines at the table with his 12 closest friends. He knows what is coming. John chapter 13 opens with this. Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. That phrase, to the end, is the Greek eis telos. It means to the uttermost, to the final limit, to the place where love has nothing left to give and gives it anyway. He washes their feet first, the job of the lowest household servant. He wraps a towel around his waist and moves around the table on his knees in front of men who should be doing this for him. Peter objects, loudly, in the way Peter always objects to things, with the full volume of a man who feels things before he thinks them. Jesus tells him, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. Peter immediately overcorrects. Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Even here, at the most solemn table in human history, Jesus is patient with the fumbling of the people he loves. Then he takes bread. The Passover bread is unleavened, flat, stripped of everything that would make it rise. It is the bread of haste, the bread of the night the angel passed over Egypt, the bread of people who did not have time to wait for dough to become something more than it was. Jesus takes this bread, this specific, loaded, 4,000-year-old bread, and he gives thanks over it, and he breaks it. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. The word remembrance in Greek is anamnesis, and it means something richer than simply thinking about someone who is absent. In the Jewish theological framework Jesus is drawing from, anamnesis means to make the past event present again, not to recall it the way you recall a fact, to re-enter it, to stand inside it again. The Passover Seder is built on this principle. Every generation of Jewish people is instructed to experience the Exodus as if they themselves came out of Egypt, not their ancestors, them. Jesus is saying, every time you break this bread, you will not merely remember what I did, you will be there. He takes the cup, he gives thanks, he passes it. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. And here is the detail that most people miss entirely. Matthew's account tells us that after they sang a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The hymn they sang at the end of the Passover Seder was the Hallel, Psalms 113 through 118. The last words they would have sung before walking into the dark toward Gethsemane were the words of Psalm 118. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. They sang that together, and then they walked into the dark. The garden is called Gethsemane, from the Aramaic Gat Shemanim, meaning oil press. It sits on the lower slope of the Mount of Olives, among ancient olive trees whose roots, some scholars believe, reach back to the 1st century. The oil press is where olives are crushed to release what is inside them. Jesus takes Peter and James and John deeper into the garden and says to them, and the honesty of this sentence should stop you completely, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. He goes a little farther. He falls on his face and he prays, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Now, Hebrews 5:7 opens fully. In the days of his flesh, he offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. This is that night. Luke's account adds a detail so physiologically specific that some manuscripts try to remove it, that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. The medical term is hematidrosis, a documented phenomenon where extreme psychological distress causes capillaries in the sweat glands to rupture. It has been observed in people facing execution, in soldiers before battle, in people whose bodies have registered before their minds have finished processing the full weight of what is coming. Jesus goes back to the disciples. They are asleep. He wakes them, returns to prayer, comes back. They are asleep again. 3 times he prays. 3 times he returns to find them sleeping. 3 times he goes back to the Father with the same request. And 3 times he ends in the same place. Not as I will, but as you will. The cup he asked to have removed is the same cup he had just passed around the table upstairs. He knew what was in it. He had just told them, and he drank it anyway. Here is the part that should break you open if you let it. The Son of God, the one through whom all things were made, the one who spoke light into existence, the one who called Lazarus out of a 4-day tomb with the sentence, lay on his face in a garden and wept and begged his father for another way. And the father, who could have provided one, did not because he did not love his son, but because he loved you more than he loved the easier path, more than he loved anything except the thing he had decided before the foundation of the world to do about the distance between himself and the people he had made. The tears in Gethsemane are the most expensive tears in history, and they fell in a garden, in the dark, with 3 sleeping friends nearby and the sound of soldiers coming through the trees. It is the 3rd day. The tomb is empty. The grave cloths are folded. Mary Magdalene has seen him in the garden and mistaken him for the gardener until he said her name. Peter and John have run to the tomb and found nothing but linen and silence and a question too large to answer standing in a doorway. And 2 disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. Their names, one of them at least, are given to us. Cleopas. Eusebius, writing in the 4th century in his ecclesiastical history, identifies Cleopas as a brother of Joseph, the father of Jesus, which would make him the uncle of the man whose death he is currently walking away from. We do not know if Eusebius is right. What we know is that these 2 people are walking in the wrong direction, away from the city where the resurrection has just happened, away from the upper room where the other disciples have gathered, toward a village called Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. Maybe they have family there. Maybe they have nowhere else to go. Maybe when everything you believed turns out to be more complicated than you understood, you walk. You put one foot in front of the other on a road you know, because motion is easier than standing still inside the wreckage of hope. They are talking as they walk, arguing, actually. The Greek word souzateo implies a back and forth debate, people who are processing the same events and arriving at different conclusions and pushing back on each other with the urgency of people who need to make sense of something that has not yet made sense. A stranger falls into step beside them. He asks what they are discussing. They stop walking. Cleopas looks at this man, this apparently oblivious stranger, who seems to be the only person in the region who does not know what has happened, and says, with the exhausted disbelief of the deeply grieved, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" The stranger asks, "What things?" And they tell him everything. Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet, mighty in deed and word, how the chief priests and rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped, Cleopas says, and those 3 words are among the saddest in the New Testament. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. Past tense. The hope is in the past tense now, on a road going the wrong direction, spoken to a stranger who is about to say something that will reroute the entire conversation. "How foolish you are," the stranger says, "and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." And then, beginning with Moses and working through all the prophets, he explains to them everything in the scriptures concerning himself. 7 miles of walking, 7 miles of the most extraordinary Bible study in history, and the 2 disciples do not recognize the teacher. Luke tells us their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They listen. They absorb. Something stirs in them that they will not be able to name until later. They reach Emmaus as the sun is going down. The stranger moves as if he intends to continue walking, and Cleopas does something that is, in its quiet way, one of the most important things anyone does in the Gospels. He asks him to stay. Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. The stranger agrees. They go inside. A table is set. Food is brought. And then, in a gesture so familiar that it will break open everything they have been holding back for 7 miles, the stranger takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it to them. Their eyes open, they know him, and he vanishes from their sight. They sit there for a moment in the wreckage of an ordinary dinner table that has just become the site of a resurrection appearance. And then one of them says the thing that has been true for 7 miles without their knowing it. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us? They get up immediately. It is night. The road is dark and 7 miles long. They walk it anyway, back toward Jerusalem, back toward the upper room, back in the right direction. Because when the thing you had given up on turns out to be alive, distance stops being an obstacle. Here is what I need you to understand about Emmaus. Jesus did not reveal himself through an argument. He did not reveal himself through a theological proof or a display of power or a declaration. He revealed himself in the breaking of bread, at a table, in the gesture that had been his language all along. Took, blessed, broke, gave, the same gesture on a hillside with 20,000 hungry people, the same gesture in an upper room the night before he died. The table was always where he showed you who he was. The road was how he got you to the table. Now we can go to the beach. It is early morning. The sky over the Sea of Galilee is the particular gray that comes just before the light commits to being light. 7 disciples have been out on the water all night. Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, 2 others. They have caught nothing. A figure stands on the shore about 100 yards away. In the mist, in the early gray, he is not recognizable. He calls out to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answer no. He tells them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. They do, and the net fills so completely they cannot haul it in. The catch is overwhelming, specific, inexplicable. And the disciple whom Jesus loved turns to Peter and says 4 words that will send Peter over the side of the boat. It is the Lord. Peter wraps his outer garment around himself. John includes this detail with the precision of an eyewitness who was there and has never forgotten it, and throws himself into the water. The other disciples follow in the boat, dragging the net. They're about 100 yards from shore, and when they get there, they find that the risen Christ has already built a fire. There is bread. There are fish already cooking on the coals. He does not need what they have caught. He has already provided. But he tells them to bring some of the fish they have just caught and add it to what is already there, including them in the meal, making their contribution part of the provision, the way a good host always makes the guest feel that their presence added something rather than simply received. "Come and have breakfast," he says. And here is the detail that John records with the quiet weight of someone who has spent decades understanding why it mattered. It was a charcoal fire. The Greek word is anthrakia. It appears only twice in the entire New Testament, here, on the beach, and one other time in John chapter 18, in the courtyard of the high priest, on the night of the arrest, where Peter stood warming himself at a charcoal fire while inside, Jesus was being questioned. Where? 3 times. People asked Peter if he knew this man. And 3 times, Peter said he did not. A charcoal fire. The smell of it would have hit Peter before the boat reached the shore. The same smell, the same particular combination of smoke and heat that his body had registered on the worst night of his life. The night he had failed the person he loved most in the world, 3 times before the rooster crows. Jesus does not bring this up immediately. They eat first. He feeds them. Took, blessed, broke, gave. The same language, the same gesture, the same host at every table from Cana to this cold beach at the edge of the world. And when the meal is finished, he turns to Peter. Simon, son of John, do you love me? He uses the name Simon, the old name, the before name, the name from before Jesus renamed him Peter, the rock, the name that belongs to the man who denied him. 3 times he asks. 3 times Peter answers yes. 3 times Jesus responds with a commission. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. 3 questions to answer 3 denials. 3 affirmations to overwrite 3 failures. 3 times the same love, offered back across a charcoal fire to a man who had decided he was no longer worthy of it. When it is finished, Jesus says 2 words to Peter, the same 2 words he said at a tax collector's booth in Capernaum, the same words that started all of this. Follow me. Not with an argument, not with a theological resolution, with breakfast, with fire, with a question asked 3 times by the one person whose opinion of Peter was the only one that had ever truly mattered. This is the last meal in the Gospel of John, the last table, the last moment before the ascension, before the church, before 2,000 years of history set in motion by a handful of people who had watched a man die and then found him cooking breakfast on a beach. And the risen Christ, the one who has defeated death, the one who holds the keys of hell and of death, the one before whom every knee will one day bow, is standing on a shore with charcoal smoke on his hands, still feeding people, still setting the table, still saying, come, sit down. There is enough. There is more than enough. So here is what we have seen. A wedding in Cana where the best wine arrived last, poured out for ordinary people at an ordinary table by a man nobody in that room fully understood yet. A tax collector's house where the wrong crowd ate with the right person and nobody left the same. A Pharisee's dinner where a woman's tears became the most honest thing in the room. A hillside where 20,000 hungry people were fed with a boy's lunch and 12 baskets of excess were left over. An upper room where bread was broken over the weight of everything that was about to happen. A garden where the Son of God fell on his face and wept until his sweat ran like blood. A road where 2 people walking the wrong direction were turned around by a stranger who revealed himself in the breaking of bread. A beach where the risen Christ built a fire and cooked breakfast for 7 exhausted fishermen and asked one broken man 3 times if he loved him. Tables and tears. Tears and tables. The same language. The same God. The same invitation repeated across 3 years of ministry and 2,000 years of history. Come, sit down. There is room for you here. I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Maybe you are watching this at a table that feels too empty. A chair where someone used to sit that nobody sits in now. A meal you are eating alone because the relationship ended or the person died or the distance became too great to cross on a Tuesday night. Maybe the hope you carried into this year is starting to sound like Cleopas on the road. We had hoped. Past tense. The hope belongs to a version of you that believed more easily than you do right now. Or maybe you are at a full table and still feel alone, surrounded by people who do not know the thing you are carrying, performing fine when you are not fine, eating and drinking and saying the right things and wondering if anyone in this room sees what is actually happening inside you. Jesus ate with people who were not fine. He wept with people who were not fine. He did not require you to have your theology sorted before he sat down with you. He did not require you to have stopped failing before he built the fire. He required one thing from Peter on that beach. Not a perfect record, not an explanation, not a promise to do better. Just an honest answer to an honest question. Do you love me? That is still the question at every table, in every tear, underneath every meal and every grief and every moment when the distance between who you are and who you thought you would be feels too large to cross. He is still asking it, and he is still building the fire before you get there. 3 things to take with you. The first, Jesus chose tables on purpose. Every meal was a statement about who belongs, who is welcome, who is worth sitting with. If you follow him, your table, your actual physical table, is a theological act. Who is at it matters. Who is missing from it matters more. The second, his tears were not a weakness in his divinity. They were the proof of it. A God who cannot weep over what breaks his people is a God too small to be worth following. The tears of Jesus are not the exception to his glory. They are the expression of it. The third, and this is the one I want you to carry the longest, the resurrection did not end the meals. It continued them. The risen Christ still ate, still broke bread, still built fires on cold beaches for people who had been out all night catching nothing. Whatever comes after death, and the Christian claim is that something extraordinary comes after death. It apparently involves a table. It apparently involves food. It apparently involves the same host who has been setting the table since a wedding in Cana, when the wine ran out and a mother said 4 quiet words to her son and trusted that love would know what to do. The best is still being saved for last. That is the promise of every meal Jesus ever shared. That is the promise underneath every tear he ever wept. That the story is not over. That the wine has not run out. That the fire on the beach is already built. That the breakfast is already waiting. And that when you finally get to the shore, exhausted, empty-handed, smelling of a night that produced nothing, the first thing you will hear is not a judgment. It is an invitation. Come and have breakfast. If this moves something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me which table or which moment of weeping hit you hardest. And if you want to go deeper into the Gospel of John, the most intimate of the 4 Gospels, the one written by the disciple who was closest to the fire on that beach, that study is linked in the description below. Thank you for spending 30 minutes at this table. I will see you in the next one.